Pleasant good afternoon or pleasant good day, everyone. It is absolutely my pleasure in sharing with you in your Learning to Lead series. My name is Dr. Andrew B. Campbell, aka DR.ABC, and as I said before, it's a pleasure to share in this leadership series with you. I want to engage us all in talking about diversity leadership and the focus of being authentic when it comes to diversity leadership. There's a lot being said about inclusion, diversity, racism, anti-Black racism, white supremacy, identity. So there's just so much going on. And as a leader, I hope you are quite aware of what is happening around you, because if you are not aware, then we have already begun with a red flag. Okay, so I want to make sure that you are aware of what is happening around you. And as leaders, you're thinking about yourself and how I plan to lead. How will I lead? How will I be a diversity leader? How will I be an inclusive leader? How will I be an advocate? We're not going to be so caught up on the term diversity, but how do we create change? How do we be true allies? How do we be true advocates in our areas of leadership so that we can ensure that we create change among us? And that is what this quick presentation is about. And as we think about diversity leadership, North House 2016 talks about authentic leadership and, being genuine and real. And I think one of the issues we have is that so much of what is happening in inclusion and diversity is a performance. And that is something that I want us to think about, is that so much of what is happening around us when it comes to diversity and inclusion is a performance. And that is why that is why I am pairing authentic leadership with diversity leadership with moral courage. Because more of us as educational leaders, as leaders on a whole, need to understand our place, our power, and how we must move to being way more authentic about our work in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And that is what I want to make sure we talk about today. And so I want to start with something quite current. So I want to start with something I would say that is quite current and is quite happening around us. And that is an example of what happened on yesterday, January the 6th, day before yesterday, January the 6th, in the United States with the Capitol building. But something I want to bring your attention to, as you can see on the screen, is Mick Mulvaney, his resignation. And I noticed how CNN wanted to make a big thing, or the news media wanted to make a big, I don't know, I would say an applause for Mick Mulvaney on resigning from the Trump administration. And I want to say this is an example of what we talk about when we say performance, when we say checkbox, when we say symbolism, when we say inauthentic, because this is a leader. We're talking about leadership now. This is a leader who had a position in the White House and have seen all of this happening, but he has benefited from it. And at the last minute, 13 days to go, you're going to put on a show. Look at me, I resign. 13 days to go, look at me, I resign. I finally became woke and saw what happened, and I'm resigning. And I'm going to say to you, as persons who are talking about leadership, that is an example of being pretentious, of being inauthentic, of checking a box, of symbolism. And that is an example that none of us should be following when it comes to being a leader for equity, diversity, and inclusion. That is no action. That is absolutely no action. That is a performance. And I want us to understand that that is a performance. So I want to move on. And why is it that we see people performing? And when we see people performing diversity, when we happen to see these kind of diversity or inclusive performances, what happens is that people leave in that space, they leave unchallenged, they leave unchanged, and they leave unbothered. So as you're thinking about leadership, I want you to think about, are you being challenged? What are you looking for when it comes to change? And are you bothered by what is happening around you? Because if you're going to say you're a change agent and you're a transformative leader and a transformational leader and an advocacy leader and a servant leader, if you're going to use those kind of titles for yourself, you have to think about, how are you being challenged? How are you enacting change? And how are you being affected by what's happening around you? And so in this quick session, I want us to just look at a few things as we articulate the various dimensions of differences that we see around our personal and professional community. Also look at ourselves. You know, the stereotype and unconscious bias that impact our well-being, in order to create an inclusive and equitable culture and climate. And think about your personal action plan to acquire the skills to be a real diversity leader. But something I want to leave with you as I leave this, as I move forward, is that these outcomes are really about you as an individual. A lot of time we have these conversations, these workshops, these videos, these conferences, these talks, and I think that we look around the room. We look around the room and try to figure out, as an organization, as a group, who are we speaking to? You know, we do that. And I want to say to you, we're speaking to you. We're speaking to ourselves. We're speaking to individual. We want to start in doing this work of inclusion and diversity and equity leadership. We want to start with ourselves. Be aware what makes you different. Be aware of your own bias and your prejudice. Be aware of your privilege and your power. And when we talk about privilege and power, a lot of us, we get very nervous. Whenever there's a discussion about power and privilege, a lot of us, we get very nervous, we get very tense, we get very uncomfortable. And I'm going to say to you, like I've said to my students tons and tons of time again, I am not asking you to be pretentious and deny your power and your privilege, because you can't. You can't. The reality is absolutely you can't, and you shouldn't. But I want you to think about, how am I going to use my power, my privilege to create access, to create change, to impact change, to advocate, to speak on the behalf of those who don't have a voice, to create access, to create openings, to pull out a seat for those who need a seat at the table. How do you use this power and the privilege to do that work? And that is where I want you to center the concept of power and privilege for a while. For a while. Be conscious of your differences and be deliberate and intentional about inclusion, because who you are impacts how you lead. I want to leave that with you, and I want you to underline that as you're taking notes, as you're listening. Who you are impacts how you lead. A lot of us, we are trying to lead from a different place. A lot of us, we are trying to lead from a different position. But who you are impacts how you lead. Be honest. If you are a person who's pretentious, your leadership will be pretentious. If you are a racist person, that is going to come out in your leadership. Who you are impacts how you lead. If you are kind, if you are a person who uses empathy, if you're a person who understands the people around you, it's going to come out in your leadership. Who you are impacts how you lead. And then when you have a good understanding of who you are, then I want you to think about, as a diversity leader, the persons around you. Diversity leaders are aware of patterns of discrimination and inequalities and injustice, and how these systematic patterns can show up covertly in their communities. A lot of us in the last maybe 8 or 9 months have spent a lot of time talking about awareness. And that is important. Awareness is extremely important. But we want to make sure we understand that awareness has to lead to something, and that has to lead to your actions. So I want you to continue to grow in cultural competence. Continue to be aware of anti-Black racism. Continue to be aware of the issues that are facing our indigenous community. our issues that are facing our immigrant community, issues facing our students with disabilities, issues of accessibility, issues that are going through right now during a pandemic. But when you think about those issues, as a leader, I want you to think about the solutions. Do you know the people you serve? There are so many leaders who are living in a bubble. You are detached from the real happenings around you. How many times have you watched a movie and there may be something happening and they'll bring the manager or the leader or the CEO or somebody very rich and fabulous who comes to the organization, and then they are surprised. Always, the script is always, they are surprised of what is happening under their watch. The truth is because they are disconnected. They don't know the people they serve. They don't know the people who work for them or people who serve them. Because what they have done, they have built their leadership on stereotypes and assumptions and deficit thinking. And so I want you to be careful as a diversity leader to spend the quality time needed and necessary in understanding the people you're interacting with, the people you are leading. The people you are leading, the people you are choosing, you've chosen to lead. How do you do that? Because a lot of our leadership is impacted by our unconscious bias. And I like to keep it at the word unconscious bias, because the truth is, some of us, we don't have unconscious bias. We are very clear on our bias, very conscious and very deliberate about the bias that we own. And that is why we discriminate, we marginalize, we turn a blind eye. That is why we have certain things like cultural blindness, cultural insensitivity, because we understand the difference, but we do not care about the difference. And a lot of us as leaders, we are guilty of what I call recreating sameness. We choose people who look like us. We like people who look like us. And when we look around in our boards, we are seeing that the 12 people are 12 old white men. And this is a trend that we have seen, and we have to break that as a leader. How do we ensure inclusion and diversity and equity and representation in our organization? If you do not know the biases and you harbor, you are powerless against them and may be harming others unintentionally. In this case, ignorance is not bliss. Ignorance is privilege. And I want you to think about that as we think about the work that we are doing when it comes to being a diversity leader or being an inclusive leader. How are we doing that? And I want to quickly wrap up into the key characteristics of a diversity leader. You are continuously and consciously unfolding in self-awareness. We have to be aware, and that is done through critical reflection. And that's why I tell people all the while, this one-stop video is not going to let you walk away you're being more inclusive or being, so woke or being so informed. It's a continuous process of saying to yourself, I want to do more. I want to grow. I want to learn. I want to be an inclusive leader. I want to be a diversity leader. I want to be an authentic leader. A critical consciousness and commitment to social justice. We have to be aware of what's happening around us and how we can impact change. That is one of the personal characteristics. You notice this talk is about, it's personal, it's about you. It's not about the organizational level. I'm very intentional about that this conversation is not about the entire organization. It's not about the entire university. It's not about the entire faculty or the entire department or the entire group or even the entire class. It's about you. You the individual listening to this video. You the individual engaging in this conversation with me. How are you critically engaging in your commitment to social justice? How are you using your knowledge and understanding in your institution? How are you growing in cultural competence. I'm sure many of you know about that. If not, it's good. It's a beautiful thing to really research and examine the cultural competence continuum. Cultural competence continuum. How do you grow? How do you grow in cultural competence? How do you bring yourself as a leader to a place where you can say to yourself, I feel I am culturally competent, not culturally blind, not culturally insensitive, not culturally ignorant, but culturally competent. And then how do I use my moral courage and my resilience to create inclusive spaces? I like this form. I love this form. It's a form that I want you all to think about myself as a diversity leader. Reflection. We go back again to critical consciousness, critical reflection. What are the knowledge, skills, and dispositions that you need to be a diversity leader? This is something I want you to own. This is something I want you to think about. This is something I want you to own and think about. What are those knowledge, skills, and disposition that I need as a leader? Something to think about. The diversity leader engaging in courageous conversation. This is what you're having with me today, a courageous conversation. Some of you, I know you're not used to this kind of conversation, but this is what we call a courageous conversation. And why we call it courageous? Because it takes bravery. It can be uncomfortable. It is bringing some of us out of our comfort zone, out of our regular. It is opening up sometimes a Pandora box, but we have to engage in these conversations. They are necessary. I tell my students in my master's program, these conversations are necessary. They are long overdue. A very big one as a leader, and a major one as a leader I want to leave with you, is to ensure your message match your leadership. Ensure your message match your leadership. That's something I want to correct there. Ensure your message match your leadership. Absolutely important. Ensure your message match your leadership. See the people you lead. We said this before, and I'm repeating it for emphasis. How do we grow in cultural competence? How do we plan to learn and unlearn? Because there's a lot for many of us to learn, but there's so much for some of us to also unlearn as leaders. Because many of us, we have to understand that we have learned about diversity and others from all kinds of space, and many of those spaces have been very stereotypical. If you be honest to yourself, ask yourself, what is it that I know about a Black man? So I'm speaking to you as a Black man. I'm a Black immigrant man from the Caribbean with an amazing Jamaican accent. If you're honest to yourself, what have you learned over time about Black people, about immigrants, about Black professors, about Jamaicans, about persons with accent? What have you learned over the years about that? Some of you need to unlearn some of those things, because some of those things are assumptions and they're stereotypes. They are what you have used to marginalize. Those are some of the tools leaders have used to marginalize, discriminate, close doors on people who are different. So as a leader, there is some unlearning to do. And then the most powerful thing is to act. How are you going to act? And I leave you with my final idea when it comes to action. And that is the idea of moral courage. I leave you with my final idea for action when it comes to a diversity leader. And that is about gaining the moral courage that you need to lead. That is something I see happen in our schools, in our organizations, a lot of places. People who lack the moral courage to lead. I'm going to repeat it. It is a concern when we see people doing the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion. People who lack the moral courage. And I'm not pushing back at you to say if you lack the moral courage, get out the way. That's not what I'm saying. I am saying if you lack the moral courage to do the work of equity, diversity, and inclusion, I'm asking you to figure out, how do I gain the moral courage, the skills that I need to lead? Because it is lacking in so many spaces. So I want you to think about that. And Northouse 2016, he talks about authentic leadership. Northouse 2016 talks about authentic leadership, a book that I really like, about authentic leadership and the characteristics. And there are some powerful words coming to us. Words like passion and purpose. Words like values and heart. Words like self-discipline and compassion, consistency, connectiveness. As we think about authentic leadership, and as we think about moral courage, and as we think about inclusion and diversity, and being a diversity leader, inclusive leader, those are some of the most powerful words I want to leave with you. Simple words, powerful words. Simple words, powerful words. I leave those with you. Your actions to promote inclusion within your organization must be intentional and deliberate. Your actions to promote inclusion in your organization must be intentional and deliberate as a leader. I want you to think about your leadership. Think about how you are leading. Think about what you're going to do when it comes to being a leader. It's very important we do that. So it's my pleasure to have this quick chat with you. I trust and hope there'll be opportunities in the future for us to engage in maybe a longer conversation where we can actually have interaction, and you have the opportunity to maybe ask some questions, and you have the opportunity to gain some feedback and back and forth with me. It's a pleasure. Continue to grow in leadership. Leadership is about growth. I want to make sure I leave that with you. Leadership is about growth. And yes, you can gain leadership skills. You can work on your leadership. That's what you are here for, to work on developing your leadership skills, your leadership qualities, your leadership stand. Develop your leadership posture. That's why you are here to do that. So it was a pleasure talking to you, sharing with you. Thank you so much for listening.